Sometimes it's fun just to build and paint a miniature in a totally different way, just to explore some of the grim aspects of the far future. Just building a miniature that's totally free from any army lists or anything like that. In this video, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to make some sort of weird thing of the Dark Mechanicum, and then we're going to paint it in the style of Blanchitsu. So this is going to be very grim, it's going to be very dark. There's sure going to be no cute plushies here. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. My original starting point for the idea here for this Dark Mechanicum thing was to go for some sort of evil tech priest. So it was going to be lots of robes and basically made of tentacles underneath them, like with a face of tentacles or something like that. But as I was going through my pile of shame, I found some kits that actually I've had for years and years and not touched, and I think now's the time to use them. The first of those is this right here. This is the Iron Strider for the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, I bought this a long time ago and I've done nothing with it, but looking at it, if you were to just remove that guy there, you can see what you start to get is a really cool weird machine there. There's actually a servitor inside it. So that got me thinking, maybe it could be some sort of mechanical thing with like a fleshy creature in the middle that's been bound in it, like some sort of demon or something like that. So what could you use for the demon? Well, again, looking through my pile of shame, I found another kit that's going to be perfect for it. And that is this, the Dark Eldar Talos, or Drukhari Talos nowadays, I suppose. And you can see this has got cool armor, but underneath it's got this weird fleshy monster that's built into it. And I know this kit is just packed with loads of useful, weird, creepy bits like syringes and stuff. So I think for some sort of weird monster, it's going to be perfect. So the plan is to build the Iron Strider to begin with its legs, and then put the Talos into it, almost like it's bound in amongst it, then decorate it with lots of mechanical parts. So that means we need to start out with the legs of the Iron Strider and the body of the Talos. So I'm going to build those, then we'll come back and work out how to get them all together. I finished building up those parts, and here they are. You can see I've got the two legs and I've got the body of the Talos just here. Now, when it comes to the Iron Strider's legs, I've not fully done it. There's a few little parts missing still, like armor, because I want to see how that evolves. But for the body, I've actually made sure not to glue on at the top of the carapace just here. So this is still separate. That's in case we just need to get it out of the way to do any work on the body around here on the head as we go along. So that's why that's still separate. I also want to make sure I fill in the underside of these vents so we can paint them as if they're glowing later on. But now the plan is to attach some legs onto the body. And my original idea was to have the legs mounted on the shoulders. So essentially in this part right here, the plan was to have it go in about there, but I think it looks really unbalanced like that. And so with playing around with it, I think it actually looks better if it sits in that part just there. So we're looking at that lower socket there on both sides. Now, because we've got this little plug mount right there, I think what we can do is just drill that out and then slot it in there so it's a nice secure join. So what we're going to do is drill that out. So to do it, what I've got is a really big drill bit. This is a 3mm drill bit, and the plan is just to put that in there and go through. And once that's done, I can glue on the legs and then glue it to the base. Now the legs are glued on. I think it's really starting to look the part. It looks extremely creepy, and so what I've done now is just filled out the legs a little bit by putting these bolts in just around there, so you just fill those gaps. And for the armor, this is some of the armor that appears on the arms of the Talos, and there's two with spikes on. They fit perfectly there, and all the spikes really match the spikes we've got on the knees, so ideal, I think. And so with that done, we can now add a head. Now for the head, what I thought would be really cool is to use one of these arms from the Talos, specifically this one, because it looks really freaky having this injector needle and these little spider-like mandibles. And I think it'd be really cool if we just mount this on the body right there, so it's almost like hanging down there like a really long sort of snout almost. So what we need to do is make sure it fits underneath the carapace in there by just removing that head and gluing it onto that part. So this is where it's going to become really useful that the carapace is still removable, because we now have easy access to the head. We need to remove it at an angle so we've got a flat surface to glue that arm onto. So to do this, I'm going to be using my razor saw, and I've got it just here. What we want to do is make sure this is comfortable so that we can really go around here like this and then just line up and start sawing the head off. Now, if you're doing this, remember just to be careful because these things are really sharp, so keep your fingers away from them. Also make sure you're just nice and stable before you start to cut. So just along here, and then once the head's removed, what I can do is then glue on that arm. With the head now glued on, this weird thing is starting to look really nightmarish, and so we can do the next thing on it, which is going to be to add some arms, and we definitely want to continue that theme of it looking horrifying. So tentacles are, of course, a great choice here. Now, when it comes to doing something like this at this stage where the model's nice and stable, if you just want to get a loose idea of how things are going to look, then a great thing to do is just get hold of some of the temporary reusable adhesive putty, and that's what I've got just here. We can use this to help just get some ideas going. So with this in mind, with the idea of using tentacles on the arms, what we can do is just get a ball of it and just put it into where the arm's going to go. And then I've got some of the tentacles that come in the Talos kit, and I'm just going to loosely put these in place just to get an idea of things. So for example, we can just push one in right there and get another one right here, I think, because it's quite small tentacles here. So we've got quite a large area to fill. So going for a pair of them definitely works. Now, as for the other one, we do have a pair of them together, which are attached to this dish-like part, so they'd have to be cut off that to make sure they match the other side, but you can get a definite idea by just loosely putting that in there. You can see now things are looking really freaky and really creepy. Now, another idea that's come about at this stage is that we could actually add a tail using another one of the tentacle-like parts from the Talos, which is the Talos's tail just here, but rather than attaching it to the assembly of the hips that would go underneath there on the original kit, instead, if it goes just under here, then you can see what you get is a really nice serpentine shape going across the top, just cresting along there like that. Now, all of this does mean, of course, there is going to be a lot of green stuffing required, but that's okay. What we should do first of all is just glue it into place, and then once the glue is dry, we can come back and green stuff it and blend it all together. So that's what I'm going to do now. Just trim these, make sure they're nice and clean, get them all glued on there, then we can move on to the next step. The glue's dry and you can see things really coming together now. I'm happy with how those tentacles are looking, and I've just made sure that the top carapace still fits and that they don't get in the way around the shoulders. So with that prepared, what we can now do is just start filling in these gaps, such as around here with some green stuff. So to do this, I've already made sure that I've got a good ball of this all prepared, and you can see I've got a good ball right there. And with this, what I've done is just twist off some little pieces to apply small amounts at once. To do it, I'm going to be using a sculpting tool, and what we've got to do is just pick up some small amounts of the green stuff and start out by just getting it in place and into some of these gaps. So for example, just here, it's a matter of just gently pushing it into place and just loosely positioning it there like that. We can also get another little dollop of it and just apply this onto this part of the arm. So just get it again into place, just push it in gently and just get it ready and set up for the next stage, which is to start taking a bit more care about really working it into these areas. Now, to prevent the green stuff from sticking to the tool, a great thing to do is to get hold of some of this, some E45 cream. It's ideal for this kind of thing. All you do is just get this opened and just get a small amount onto the end of the sculpting tool, and what this will do is stop that green stuff from sticking to it. So there we go. That's on there. Just make sure it's nicely evenly distributed, and then we're ready to go. So with the sculpting tool, I'm going to start out by using this just to push that green stuff a little bit further into the joint there like that, just to help cover that up. And the same is going to be on this one. I'm just going to use it just to start pushing it carefully into that gap. Then once you've got it in position, it's a matter of just switching to a smoother tool to start to blend it in. For this sort of thing, what I like to use is a clay shaper tool, which is like a little rubber style brush. And with this, what we can do is really smooth it out and get it all blended together. So now I'm just going to do this on all three of these parts, so both arms and the tail. It's a matter of when you're doing yours, just carry on until you're happy. And here we have the Daemon Engine with that green stuff applied. You can see I've got plenty in there on the base of the tail. I've got it in the arms, and I've also just taken the opportunity to add a little bit more. So I did just a bit there on the neck. I've also filled in these recesses because the plan is to put like a glowing light effect in there. So just basically raised up the surface of it so that the lighter part will be a bit more visible. Same is true on these little vents we've got on the back of the carapace just in there. You can see the green stuff blob underneath it. I've just used that to fill those parts in too. And so with that done, and now the next stage, which is going to be essentially detailing the miniature because it's very nearly fully built now. What I want to do is first of all add something onto the end of the tail, and for that I think going for like a hook blade would be really cool, like a scorpion tail. So I've got this piece just here. What I'm going to do is trim down this ball and also the ball socket that appears on there and just sort of fit those two parts together so we'll get that hook blade on the end just there. For these holes in the back of the carapace, I'm going to put in some vials on there, like it's some weird goo that will get injected into the monster to make it go crazy or something like that. And then after that, it's just going to be a matter of adding on a few more little details and bits and pieces just to bring it up to completion. And here we have the super creepy Daemon Engine all fully built and now ready to move on to painting it. And you can see the extra bits here I've added. I've used some bits of Talos on the underside there to cover that bolt and a little bit of armor on the back. I've added some chains and hooks and things from some Marauder Horsemen. So I've got a chain on the back of the leg here. I imagine this is used to pen it up when it's not in action, but I've got a hook hanging off the back right there. And towards the front, there's some chaotic sort of pendants hanging down. So one right there and one just in there. One other thing I did was round off all the spikes that appear on the head, because I think it'd be cool later on to paint these as if they're glowing eyes. So I'm happy with that. And so now it's fully built, I can move on to the next step, which is to paint it. Now, if you're doing something like this at home, feel free to carry on until you're happy. You can add all sorts of bits and pieces to it, maybe some weapons, some guns, anything you want. But when you are ready, it's time to start painting it. So, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm looking to paint this miniature in the grimdark Blanchitsu style. So I'm going to undercoat it in a slightly unusual way compared to what I normally do. I'm going to first of all spray it quite thoroughly with a black spray. So I'll use some Chaos Black for this. And then I'm going to lightly spray over that with a silver. Here I'm going to use some lead belcher. Now I'm going to do this in a sort of zenithal style. So I'm going to be going straight down from the top, but also a little bit towards the sides. And the idea is that because it's going to be lighter here with the silver, it's going to leave some of that black showing in some of the recesses. So give us quite a bit of depth, because we're looking for some quite high contrast here with this style of painting. So I'm going to do that, and when we come back, we can take to it with a brush. And here we have the creature with that spray applied. Now you can see it's not quite that zenithal highlight, it's sort of similar to it in that I lightly dusted it with the silver, so underneath the black is much stronger, but on the top you can see the silver is quite strong and it is also on the sides. But it's a very dark silver, so we've got lots of shadows in there, perfect for what we want at this stage. But to begin with, all the mechanical parts, I just want to lift the silver a little bit, make it a little bit lighter. So I'm going to start by dry brushing it using a medium silver, and I've got Cerakote silver for this. So to apply it, I'm going for a small dry brush from Citadel, and all I'm going to do is get this set up for a normal dry brush by just working that paint into the bristles whilst removing the excess. So I get to about this sort of strength here, and then I'm just going to start working around the model, looking for all the mechanical parts that are going to be like joints and things like the legs, and basically just brush them like this just to strengthen the silver on these parts. Here you can see the result of that dry brushing, in that all those mechanical parts are now brighter silver, but also because it's dry brushed, we've got more of a texture on it, including on the tail just there, so really nice for that grim dark style. I've not done the armour because we are going to come back to that later with a much darker silver, but before doing so we can now base coat some other bits on there. I'm going to start out with the flesh for this, and what I want to do is base coat it with quite a pale sort of ivory kind of colour to get like a really gross sort of demon skin. I'm sort of thinking like maggot skin basically is what I've got in mind here. So I'm going to use some Griffin Claw for the base coat, and then I'm going to go over it with some ivory tusk, and I'm going to sort of pseudo dry brush with this. But what we need to do first of all is get that even base coat for it. So to apply it, I'm going to be mostly using a medium base coat brush from Citadel, and this is a fairly new one that's holding a pretty good point, although it's a good idea for this sort of thing to have a more fine detail brush on hand for when you're doing the more intricate parts. But for this, what I'm going to do is just get the paint thinned down and load it up on the brush, then start looking for any of the skin that's visible. So you can see some of it is hidden underneath, just around here, so I just want to make sure we really poke the brush into that part and just block it in. I've not done anything on the armour yet, so I'm not concerned about that, but I am going to try and avoid all the mechanical parts where possible as I do this. So we're looking at areas like that. Also on the tentacles, I'm going to get the fleshy parts too, such as along the top right here on the tail. Next up, I'm going to be kind of dry brushing it using some ivory tusk. And to do this, what I've got is that same brush here, so that medium base brush from Citadel. And I've set it up like a dry brush, but the reason why I'm going for this one is because the bristles are stiffer than a regular dry brush, meaning I have a little bit more accuracy in the application. So see, what I can do is just poke it around these regions to pick out that raised part of the flesh. With that done, you can see now we've got that really gross, super pale flesh. So what we can do is just block in some other areas. And first of all, I think it's going to be the armor. And in this case, what I want is a really dark metallic, so a really dark silver. To do it, I'm going to be mixing some Dwarven Iron with some Doom Death Black. So a 50-50 mix to create that dark metal. And once that's done, we can break up some of the other metallic areas, like on the joints and things on the limbs. In this case, I'm going to go for some Spartan Bronze. But first of all, we need to do that mix. So it's Dwarven Iron and Doom Death Black, which I've got at a roughly 50-50 ratio. You can see I've got the two colours just here. I'm going to use that same brush once again, the medium base coat brush from Citadel, and it's a matter of just getting these really thoroughly mixed together. So really making sure it's all evenly distributed there like that. And then with that prepared, you can use it to start blocking in the armour. Now, when using a brush like this to mix paints, it's quite possible to get too much paint on your brush. So make sure you clean it before you start to actually apply it. So there we go. We can get some of this loaded up, and then I'm going to start looking for all the armour plating, such as the carapace on the back. I'm just going to block it in entirely. And now that's done, I'm just going to go in with a bronze colour. So here I'm using some Spartan Bronze. I'm just looking to add a little bit of interest and variety to some of these larger silver areas by breaking them up. So I'm just going to pick out various bolts and things with this colour. And here we have the model with all those base coats applied, and I've just done a quick once around to make sure everything's neat and tidy. So for example, I've made sure that all the spikes along here are silver, including the ones on the legs, just little things like that, because now we're going to move on to applying some wash. And in this case, we're moving into one of the really fun aspects of painting in this style, because now we're going to start using some enamels. And the reason why is because we're going to use them like a wash for shading, but then we're going to use some thinners to remove them away from the raised up areas and just leave them stained. So by this, we're going to start to get towards that iconic Blanchitsu looks, the very grim dark, sort of with the grimy colours, the tobacco yellows, oranges, browns, that sort of thing. So what I've got to begin with are some enamels that we're going to be using on the core parts, being that flesh. And so because I want to go towards that sort of tobacco yellow colour, what I've got first of all is an orange and a dark brown. So for the orange, I've got some light rust, and for the brown, I've got some fresh mud, and both of these are from AK Interactive. Now, I've also got some thinners, and this is quite some dirty thinners because I just use this to wash my brushes. But again, this is one that I've got here. It's from AK Interactive. So what we need to do is set this up, and to do this, I've got a dimple tray just here, and I've got an old synthetic brush here. This is an Army Painter Monster brush, and what I'm going to do is get some of these into the dimples, and I'll start out with the fresh mud. So I'm just going to get a good little pool of this in here. So 1, 2, and 3. That should be around about enough. And then to wash the brush, that's what I got these thinners for. So just want to run that in there, get rid of the excess paint, and there we go. So with that done, I'm now going to set up some of the light rust here. So a nice orange. I'm just going to get some of this into the other little dimple just here. So 1, 2, and 3, and a little bit more. I think this one's a bit weaker. There we go. And then I'm also just going to get a bit of this and put it into the fresh mud just to change the colour ever so slightly, make it a touch more orange. So there we go. So with both these prepared, all I'm going to do now is start applying it onto the flesh. Now, if it goes over the edges, it doesn't really matter because we're going to get some interesting tones that way. And remember, we are going to remove excess paint later on. So it's going to load up some of this and start applying it onto the flesh. So if we take a look at the tail round here, it's going to start painting it on, letting it run into those recesses. And every now and then, it's going to grab the other colour. So for example, just the orange on its own, put that on and let the two mix as I go along. I've given those enamels a bit of time to dry now, and they are touch dry, but to be completely actually dry is going to take more like 3 days. So we've got plenty of time to play around with it now. So it means what we can do is move on to applying another enamel, and we've still got plenty of time to start wiping it off. So the next one's going to be some engine grime, also from AK Interactive, and this is going to be for all of that lighter silver and brass. So in this case, we're looking at the machinery essentially. Now to apply it, I'm going for the same brush, so it's still that monster brush from the Army Painter, the older synthetic one here. So what we want to do is get some of this in the dimple tray once again to draw from, just to make sure that we don't overdo it and let it go out of control. But really it's a matter of just applying it over all these machinery parts now. And again, just letting it flow into the recess details. So for example, on the leg just here, it's going to start painting it on, making sure to poke it into all the nooks and crannies, not worrying too much about catching other details as I apply it. Now that enamel is touch dry as well, we can move on to adding a third one. And in this case, what I'm going to go for is some grease and bearings. So this is a near black one. It's going to be perfect for all of the dark metallic armor that we've got. I'm going to be applying it in the same sort of way, using the same brush once again, so that monster brush here. And what I'm going to do is just get some of this into the dimple tray to draw from so I can judge exactly how much is going to be on the brush at once. And with that ready, it's just a matter now of painting it onto the armor plating. And as it goes onto the armor, every now and then I'm just going to let it drift onto the various other silver details too, just to add a little bit of variety to those parts as well. Now that the whole model's been washed with those enamels, we can go on to the next bit, which is going to be to start to remove them. And for this, what you'll need is some clean thinners or white spirit. And I've got some white spirit here, completely clean, specifically for this purpose. And to apply it, what you now need are some cotton buds. So you've got a whole little selection just down here. Now it's very important that you keep this white spirit clean as you do this. So when you start removing some of the paint, just discard the cotton swab when it's used. Don't put it back in the spirits because you don't want to taint it with any colour. But basically what you do is just grab one and then just get a little bit of this on here. And you'll be surprised how far it goes. So you need to dip it in there. It's always a good idea to remove a bit of the excess too on some tissue just there like that. And then with it, you'll start wiping away some of the paint. So for example, if we take a look at the leg at the back just here, all I'm going to do is just start wiping this on it. And what happens is all that paint starts being removed from the flatter areas, but it stays in the recesses. And also because of the manner I'm doing it like this, sort of scratching along almost, what you get is some really interesting shapes and textures left behind as you go. So it gets a nice streaky finish, perfect for the style that we're going for here. So now I'm just going to work my way around doing this across the whole miniature until I reach the point where I'm happy with the sort of colour left behind. I finished removing the excess enamel paint and I'm happy with it at this point. You can see now those colours beneath are showing through nice and strong, and also we've got some really nice interesting tones on there and some shading, and also some slightly glossy effects on the carapace on the back. So we're approaching the time of putting pigments on, but before we do that we should make sure we painted anything else we want to get in there, and that includes the glowing part. So we're going to do that now. We're looking for sort of like a hellish sort of orangey glow in this case, which will suit the idea of a demon really well and also fit the colour palette we're going for here. So I'm going to start out with a deeper red. I'm going to use sanguine scarlet for this before moving on to a very bright red. In this case, I'm going to use some demon red. Then it's time to get that orange on there, and here I'm going to use some orange flare. Then to finish off, we want a very, very pale yellow. So in this case, I'm going to use some craven yellow. But we'll start out with a deeper red, so some sanguine scarlet, and to apply it, I'm going for a regular sized brush here. This is actually a size 1 from Arts Opus. Any sort of medium sized brush will do just fine if you're doing this sort of thing. What you need to do is get your paint thin down on your palette and then start blocking in all the parts that are going to have this sort of colour on them. So for example, we're going to do these eyes almost on the front of the head just here. So we just need to pick these out. So little areas such as just here. Also we've got the vents going along the back. So I'm just going to run this into those recessed areas such as just here, just making sure to fill the whole area. Next up, it's time to move on to a brighter red. So here I'm using Demon Red, and the idea of this colour is to layer it over the previous red, just leaving a little bit of it still showing through around the outside. So on the eyes, for example, it's essentially a circle that's a little bit smaller than before. And when it comes to these vents, it's a matter of painting it a bit deeper into the recessed area. So just carefully apply it into the areas such as this. Now also you can see I've been picking out these vials too, and when it comes to these, again, we're going to layer over most of it, just leaving a little bit of the previous red still showing at the base. So right down to about here. It's now time to move on to the orange. So here I'm using some orange flare, and for this one it's going to be the same sort of process, looking to apply this onto most of these areas once again, but now leaving just a little bit of that brighter red still showing around the outside. So you can see me doing this on the eyes just here, and these recessed parts will be the same thing by just applying that orange a little bit further down. On the vials it's going to be a matter of painting most of them, just stopping at around about this point here. And finally, it's time for some Craven Yellow, and with this we just want some little dots in the middle of each of these eyes, so just tiny bits there for the brightest parts. For these vents, it's going to be a small amount of this yellow just put into the very deepest area right in the middle, so we're looking around that region right there. And then when it comes to the vials, we're looking towards these top edges that we've got. We just want to introduce a little bit of yellow around this region here. And here it is, the Demon Engine with those glowing orange parts applied. And so with that done, we can now move on to the next stage, which is going to be to add some pigments, because for that grimdark look, you definitely got to get some pigments on there. And I'm going to use two with sort of like ochre, sort of orangier tones to it. So what I've got is some dark yellow ochre and also some old rust, and both these are from Vallejo. And you can see the pigment powders just here. To apply it, what you need is a softer dry brush, and so I've got one here from Citadel. There's a small one as well. I've also got some tissue paper, and what I like to do with this is just to get some of the pigment and put it onto the paper and basically use that almost like a palette to draw it onto the brush and really control how much is on there. I'm going to do the same with the ochre one as well, so just get some of that on there like that. And then all you do is just pick some up with your brush, so just work your brush into it and really get it in there, and then start applying it onto your model wherever you want it to be. And I'm going to start looking at the feet first of all, because I want the appearance of some dust being kicked up. So all you do is start dotting it on, pushing it in like this until you're happy with the result. Now if you ever find it's too much and you don't like it, remember you can easily remove this by simply washing it away with some water. So just keep playing around with it until you're happy, and then we can fix it in place. I finished applying that pigment and I'm happy here with the quantity on there. You can see it's mostly around the legs and really goes up the legs, but also I've got a few little patches on the carapace, including down the middle just there. I've been careful to keep it away from the actual glowing bit so it doesn't settle in those recessed parts, but it's just sort of staying in the model and adding more variety of tones in there. Now, if you've never used pigment powder before, you might be surprised to find that if you wipe it now, it'll come off your miniature, and that's because it is just powder and just sits there, which in some cases isn't a problem. So for example, if you put in the powders in areas where fingers won't touch for a gameplay piece, like on a tank, for example, in amongst the wheels and the track links, then it'll be absolutely fine. But if it is in an area that might get handled, such as the carapace here, especially whilst we're still painting it, doing the base and things, then you'll start to smudge it and rub it off. So in this case, it's a good idea to fix it in place. To do this, what you need is some pigment fixer, and I've got some just here. This one's from AK Interactive, and to apply it, all you need is an older small brush. So I have here an old small airbrush from Citadel. All you got to do is just get some of this onto your brush. You don't need tons and tons, so just get some loaded on there like that. And what you do is just dot it nearby to the pigment. So for example, on the feet just here, you just apply it a short distance away. So if I just dot it just there, you'll see what happens is it starts to flow down in amongst all the powder. And once it's dry, it'll seal it in place. So be careful in the application. Be sure not to poke it directly into the powder because it will affect it. But just go near it, just dotting like this, and it will set it in place. Pigments fixed, so now I think it's time to start texturing the base. And here we want to go for that iconic look with all the reds here, like you get in all the John Blanche artwork. So what I'm going to use is a reddish brown textured paint. What I've got is some Vietnam Earth, and this is from Ammo. And to apply it, you should go for an older brush for this sort of thing because it will get the texture into the bristles and gum them up. So don't use your good brushes for this. I've got an old one here. This is once again a monster brush from the Army Painter, and it's just a matter of scooping up some of this there like that, and then pasting it onto the base of your miniature. So just putting it on, then pushing it around. And I think as I do this, I'm also going to add a rock or two in there, just add a bit of variety in height, but really it's a matter of just getting this on here, then giving it a good hour to dry. And here we have the model with that texture now dry, and you can see the rocks I added in there as well as I was applying it. And so with all that dry, what we can now do is paint those rocks. And because we've got quite a Martian appearance here, that reddish brown, I think it'd be cool to paint the rocks reddish brown too. So I'm going to use some boar hide for this. Now to apply it, I'm going for my size 1 brush, and all you got to do at this stage, if you're doing the same sort of basing scheme, is just paint this in. So just make sure your paint's thinned and ready as usual, and then just start applying it over the top of these details. Now, once these have been painted, what I'm then going to do is start adding some pigments onto the base. So because we're using powders there, it is important to make sure we finish all the painting. So once these are painted, I'm just going to make sure the rim of the base is nice and neat with some Doom Death Black, and then we'll move on to those pigments. And now that's done, the last thing to do is to get some pigments on the texture of the base, because I really want to help blend those feet into the ground and give that dusty appearance. So what I'm going to go for are the same 2 pigments that I used earlier. So it's going to be some old rust and also some dark yellow ochre, and I'm going to be applying it in the same sort of way. So I'm using that small dry brush from Citadel once again, and I've got the tissue paper, and I'm going to use that almost like a palette just to get a little amount of powder on. So there's some of the rust and some of the ochre. There we go. And using this, you can just start loading it up on your brush and then applying it onto the texture. So all I'm going to do is just start randomly applying this, just playing around with it until I'm happy with the overall effect. And once that's done, it's then just a matter of sealing it in place. And once it is sealed, the Daemon Engine is complete. And with those pigments now fixed in place, the Daemon Engine is complete. So as you've seen, doing this sort of thing is an interesting challenge, and it certainly is for me when coming to paint it, because this sort of grim dark style is very different to how I normally like to paint the miniatures. But it is fun to have a go at something like this, because it really can get you out your comfort zone, get you to learn new things and try different things as well. So if you've been inspired to have a go, I definitely encourage you to give it a try, because it's really fun. Just have a look through some of the old John Blanche artwork and see what creepy things can inspire you, and then go from there and see what you can create. So I hope you have fun, and we'll see you again very soon.